Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Generational Dental Wealth Show. My name is Dr. Jamine Ifedi. This week, we have a fun collaborative episode with the Truth Be Told podcast, led by Dr. Leroy Horton, as well as Dr. Walter Aka. This is a fun conversation in which we delve into the details of how I became a traveling dentist, as well as how I found contracts and the beginning stages of my career. Tune in. I hope you enjoy this week's episode.
Hello, this is Truth Be Told. This is Dr. Walter Aka.
Hey, this is Leroy Horton.
How y'all doing? This is Dr. Jamine Ifedi.
All right, or AKA Doc. That's what he wanted. He said, just call me Doc.
I call me Doc. DOC.
DOC. with the MBA. With the MBA. You know what I mean?
I forget that.
I'm gonna say I'm excited about this episode. I'm really excited because not only do we have another colleague that's also podcasting and killing in the podcast industry, but we also have somebody who has gone through the whole gambit of dentistry. You were once a traveling dentist. You mentor to dental students. You have your own podcast. The man has his own dental office now, Empire Dental Group. So it's kind of, what doesn't he do? I feel like the next step would be he also owns an orphanage. You know what I mean?
Don't even say it. If you say it, I'm hanging up right now.
Back home in Nigeria. So if anybody would like to support his House of Hope Ministries.
Okay, so he does everything.
Yes.
This man does everything. So
that is good.
So we're excited. I feel lesser than just being.
Are we going to do our ceremonial competition on jollof rice? Like
we're not going to do that. We're not going to. We've already established a Ghanaian jollof.
All about peace and love. Peace and love. Peace and love.
But anyway, Doc, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. Really appreciate you.
Thank you both for your time.
Yeah, man. So I want to start off by just basically asking you the first thing. When you came out of dental school, what was the vision for your dental career?
Man, where do we start? Ultimately, the end game was definitely ownership, just because dentistry is one of those few niches within healthcare that allows an entrepreneur to be able to express themselves. So definitely ownership was the end game for sure. At least the first end game. You have multiple end games, but that was definitely the first one. So my goal coming out of school was, how do I get as much information in my head as quickly as possible? I don't come from a dental background where, your mother or your father might be a dentist, or uncle or auntie. I'm the first dentist I knew. I always joke and say, but it's actually very serious. I met my first man of color who was a dentist when I was in dental school. So how do you become something you've never seen before, right? So going into dental school, you're putting together a dream with nothing to really base it off of, So sometimes, you're putting together dreams based off of wishes and hopes. And then when your wishes and hopes become reality, now it's like, okay, what do I hope for next? So practice ownership was always that next step. But again, since you've never really seen it close up, it's just taking one step at a time.
Was that part of the motivation for dentistry? Was it more of a healthcare, interpersonal relationship motivation to get into dentistry, or was it the entrepreneurial possibilities that kind of drove you in that direction?
That's a great question. See, the beautiful thing about business is that it can be expressed in any particular avenue, right? You can open up a restaurant, you can sell baseball cards, you can do any particular way, right? So once you understand that entrepreneurial spirit's inside of you, you can just move past to the next step. So for me personally, I wanted to help people, right? So I was between becoming an OBGYN or a dentist, actually. I either wanted to help people make babies or be able to help people create smiles, one of the two, right? So I actually took both entrance exams, the NCAP on the medical side and the DAT for dental school. And I said, Lord, whichever one I do better on, that's where I'm going. So I took both exams, did better on DAT, and I knew I was going to become a dentist. So we just went on straight to dental school and just really had fun with it.
All right. So what did your counseling look like? Because those are even though there are within the scope of healthcare, those are two different trajectories. Sure. What kind of advice or guidance were your counselors telling you when you were expressing such a divergent, aspirations?
That is actually a very great question. And again, how do you become something you've never seen before? So again, I'm trying to become something I've never seen before. I'm doing it in an unconventional way. So who do you really ask? Unfortunately, on the undergrad side of things, or even an MBA program, nobody's there really mapping out what it looks like to be a pre-dent or really a pre-med. So really just taking it step by step. Honestly, I'm getting a lot of advice from people who are not dentists or medical doctors who are giving me their best advice, and then you're taking it based off what you're seeing on Google, and then just trying to put it together the best way you possibly can. I know the one thing that I was always told is that if your GPA is good, you're always going to have options, right? So protect the GPA at all costs, make sure that was taken care of. So by the time I took both entrance exams, it was really just choosing a door, more of trying to, start from scratch. So for anybody out there, if you don't know what you want to do, or if you don't really have a lot of mentors in that space, the best thing you can possibly do at that point is protect your GPA to give yourselves as many options as possible. Not saying if your GPA isn't great that you don't have options, but it just makes things a lot easier for sure.
Bro, that is a gem.
Sense.
We need to highlight that answer, turn it into a clip, because man, we work with so many students across the spectrum.
Yeah.
And some of them are somewhat decided, some are undecided. But you're right. If you don't have a solid plan and you're not well within that plan, having a solid GPA, when you get to the point where you can make a decision, opens, keeps doors open for you. So I love that you said that. Love that.
So, you talk about basically being unique in the sense that you chose different routes, right? You come out of dental school and you didn't go straight into ownership, right? You said you traveled a little bit. Tell me how you got into that mindset because again, I don't think people talk about, okay, you're going to graduate, you're going to become a traveling dentist. How did that look like for you? How do you set that up? How do you even begin to think of that? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. The same way we keep going back to the same point. How do you become something you've never seen before, right? I never knew anybody who was a traveling dentist. I didn't know anybody even who did locums. It took like 3 phases of networking to get to even somebody who did locum tenens, right? So I'm getting to the point, I know my outcome, ownership, and I know I need to get as much information as possible because again, I don't come from a dental background, right? I get as much experience as I can in school. But my mother so wisely told me that maybe going straight into ownership might not be the best idea for you right now, just because you don't come from that heavy dental background. So you might want to take a year, get as much as you can underneath your feet. So now you know what you need to do and you know what you have to do. Now you just got to do it, right? So that's when it put all the pieces together and said, you know what? I need to get to as many places as possible. So it didn't even really start out travel dentistry. My first contracts I signed in April. We graduated in May. So, you know how it is in dental school that 4th year, everybody got their master plan. I'm going to this residency. I'm going to go work with this mentor and everything like that. People are asking me, and I'm like, to be honest with you, I really don't know. And I'm okay with not knowing because I know that the plan itself is what matters. So my first contract was actually between two dentists who did not do extractions. And extractions is one of the things that I did probably 5 or 10x what the requirement was in school. I just hung out in the oral surgery department. When I was entering my 4th year, a mentor told me when everybody gives you the, I want to do a 1-year residency after school because I don't necessarily feel ready. And he challenged me and said, why don't you feel ready? Your 3rd year entering your 4th year. Why wouldn't you feel ready if you have a whole nother year ahead of you? If you truly don't feel ready, then cool, go get what you need to go get, right? But don't just give me that excuse that you don't feel ready. So I took that 4th year as a challenge to really hang out in the oral surgery department, the periodontal department, the prosthodontic departments, to really get as much information in my head as possible. So then I'm coming out and I'm covering for 2 dentists who don't do extractions out in private practice, and they've been dentists for 15 years. I remember my 2nd day on the job was a full mouth extraction. It was on a 18-year-old young man, unfortunately. His family his oral health wasn't necessarily a priority. So I remember we took out 31 teeth and 1 tooth was impacted. So I said, you know what, I'm going to leave that tooth in there so you could always tell people you have teeth, So now he still has that 1 tooth in there that's covered up, but he has his upper and his lower denture. And that was how the first day went, But at the same time, I would not advise that for everybody because what happens when they bring you in to handle the surgeries and you get stuck, So, again, it's very unconventional, but at the same time, you got to know what makes you special and really hone in on that. So by getting that experience within those particular departments and handling a few full mouth extractions in school before graduating, I knew that that's a service I could provide for these 2 particular dentists.
So let me ask you this. Now, we've actually had another gentleman that came on, but he would teach, other general dentists about third molar extractions and full mouth and implants and so forth. And I'm noticing a theme here where anybody that does the traveling, we'll call it traveling just for the sake of argument, but moves around and covers other dentists for certain tasks, it always seems to be surgical.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is that something that you would actually advise maybe students who are in your position, third and fourth year, to say, hey, really focus in on surgery? Or would you say, nope, focus in on what you like to do, or focus in on, maybe going for another year? Because I think, to me personally, it's not necessarily if you weren't ready or not. It was what could another year of training help you do? You were an example that is not, it's rare. Let's be honest. You're a rare example to be that prepared after graduating, right? What advice would you give to these students who are coming out and thinking they're going to do what you did?
I think you bring up a very good point. It's not about if you necessarily feel ready, if that's not your track, right? Like, for me, that was my track. Get into ownership as soon as possible. So for me, it was, do you feel ready? Do you not feel ready? Right? If that's not your track, then you need to get as prepared as possible. So when you finally do come out, you can do what you need to do, right? So you don't have to bring in me to handle your extractions. You can handle your own extraction, do whatever you need to do in your particular office. So for these other individuals who are in a position where they're in their third year and they're seeking advice on what the next step looks like, I really counsel you to really take time. And one thing that's not done enough in dental school is for people to really search within themselves on what you truly want, right? I feel like we all are either choose A, B, C, or D, right? You're going to choose this path or this path, but not really trying to figure out internally what you truly want to do. Because the closer you get to what your inner self truly wants to do, the more fulfilled you're going to be, right? It sucks when you've done all the hard work and you end up in a point that wasn't necessarily supposed to be your destination. And I feel like a lot of people get to that point, and that's why you see a lot of people, unfortunately, wanting to go back and specialize and respecialize, and it's like you chose a particular path. No, some people go back and they respecialize a second or third time. They go keto, then they go ortho.
That's you know who that is? That's called Dr. Horton.
There's nothing.
That's a lifer when it comes to education.
There's nothing wrong. See, some people are born for education, and that's their path, right? And I always say we should have the right to be able to change our minds.
That's it,
right? But as long as you do the best you can with the information you have at the time, that's all anybody can ever ask for you.
Right. Do you believe in like the super dentist, the dentist that does everything, ortho, veneers and extractions and all that other stuff? Do you think that's actually
the jack of all trades,
the jack of all trades, the master of none? Do you think that that's actually possible to be the jack of all trades, to be that super dentist nowadays?
Now, we're talking about clinically inclined, or we're talking about knowledge based? Because I feel like we should all be
I'm talking about clinically inclined. Knowledge, I can read a book about anything.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily mean I can translate to that, right? Like I can read a book about building a house. I shouldn't build your house. You see what I mean? So clinically, I'm talking about clinical based.
Clinically based. If you are in a particular specialty, you should be the specialist at what you do, right? If you're a general dentist, you should know a little bit about everything because you chose to be a general dentist, right?
Okay.
By knowing a little bit about everything is one thing I've noticed is the more you learn you don't know, right? So if you're a true general dentist, you should know what's in your wheelhouse and what's not in your wheelhouse, right? There are people who are literally specialized to handle certain problems, right? As a general dentist, I can do a majority of cases, right? Whether it be Invisalign, whether it be third molar extraction, whether it be molar root canals, whatever it is, I can do majority of things, right? But at the same time, there are certain things that are not best in my hands, right? Number one, pedo. I'm not necessarily passionate about that, right? So for a particular patient who has a difficulty connecting with a child, I would probably refer them to a pedo friend who could better incline to handle that particular situation, right? A gum graft, right? That's not necessarily best in my hands. I need to get that into a better set of hands, right? We're talking about teeth that are laying down inside of the bone fully impacted. That's not best in my hand. I need to get that into a better set of hands. But so the closer you get to what you know, now you can handle 80 to 85% of the cases. And those 15%, you need to get into the right hands for those who actually do that on a daily basis.
Okay. So I see a lot of myself in you.
Oh my
especially when I was
goodness.
younger.
Oh my
Very
goodness.
driven.
You would think that
No,
he's like
I mean, you know
90.
my story. I mean, his story almost sounds just like mine, right?
It
Extra
does.
surgical training, my traveling, doing nothing but surgery for other doctors, had that little niche going. But what I also see in you is you have a bulldozer personality, meaning there's no obstacle I could find to put in front of you that you're not going to knock down. You're driven internally, you're motivated. And that's beautiful to see, especially with young brothers, right? And I know since you've had your podcast, you've talked to a wide range of people. Do you ever tailor your message for people whose personality isn't as assertive, as self-motivated, as, you know, never say die, as maybe yours and mine and Walt's was? How do you talk to people who don't necessarily approach life inherently? They're not hardwired for that battle like you are.
I love that question for so many reasons, and here's why. The main premise of the generational dental wealth is to build generational wealth using dentistry as your particular avenue, right? And the reason I love that is because finances is an individual game that you can work as a group to do, but ultimately is an individual game. And I love it because it doesn't matter if you're a big personality or a more introverted personality, the end game is still the same, right? So I don't want anybody thinking that you have to be a big personality to make sure your family is financially secure, right? Like it could help get things done faster, or it could hurt things going faster, right? So that's the reason we harp on necessarily finding a way to harness your skill set, whether if that's introversion or extroversion, to be able to create the outcome that you want, right? Don't think that the bigger personalities necessarily make more money or anything along those lines, or are necessarily happier, right? Because money is just one part of the particular piece of happiness, right? That's the reason we want to really focus on the holistic component of things. So yeah, sometimes we definitely do have to hone things in a little bit. When we were speaking to UNC last month, one of the questions that we posed was, what is your greatest non-dental accomplishment? And the reason we ask that question is because sometimes we get so wrapped up in the fact that I'm a dentist that we forget that we're still a person first, right? So what are the accomplishments that are unique to you that you see as an accomplishment that necessarily your classmates or other individuals who are dentists might not see? Because we got to start appreciating the little things about ourselves that seem little to us, but are actually big time accomplishment. One young lady, she said her proudest accomplishment was buying her first home. To another dentist, that might not mean too much, but for somebody who has never lived in a home that was owned, that's a big time move. For another individual, it was having their first child. Right. Who knows how much struggle went into them conceiving their first child, right? We got to celebrate these small accomplishments that seem small to us, but are actually big to somebody else. The ability to create life, be able to house your family in a home. So yes, we tailor what I say in particular to the fact that I want you to focus on what makes you special. And once you learn how to bring out what's special to you, even if you are acquired a personality, that is still special. And you can still utilize that as a weapon to get your mission across so you can help more people who identify with a more quieter personality.
Okay, but speaking of celebrating, so who's we? I don't think we really dove into this other venture that you're doing. Tell us about the we that was out there speaking and educating people on their financial goal setting and accomplishments.
For sure. So Generational Dental Wealth Podcast is not just a podcast, it's more of a way to be able to inform individuals. So we go to different conferences. When I say we, it's my brother, Kingsley Ifedi, dental specific CPA, as well as my wife, Donna Ifedi. She's a dental hygienist, as well as an office manager at our office. And we try to take a multiverse approach so we can be able to tackle different challenges, right? If you have dental specific questions, what I can answer, I will answer. And I have a lot of mentors who can help fill in gaps if necessary. If it's a financial question, Kingsley can get those particular questions answered. For a lot of, in particular, our female audience who has more family-related questions, how do you weave things in together? My wife can answer those particular questions. Because the goal is to be able to, just like a general dentist, can we answer 80 to 85% of the questions and be able to have networks that can fill in the other 15%? So we've traveled to different schools, we've shared different conferences. Just 2 weekends ago, we were in the Ritz-Carlton in Charlotte, North Carolina, having our Old North State. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with the NDA, National Dental Association. We're having our conference. We were able to have our conference with about almost 100 dentists and dental students.
Okay.
We were in charge of the dental student component of it, which is about half the population. And we had a financial panel where we can just be able to talk about important things because, believe it or not, I mean, there are students who don't even have a credit card. I mean, how are we truly preparing students for this real world of going from earning $0 to hundreds of thousands of dollars if we don't even understand simple things like credit or how to write a check, you know? So that's what we really try to tackle. How do we fill in the gaps so you can truly enjoy the dentistry component without necessarily having to worry about the financial side and having that financial anxiety that exists. So instead of you trying to chase the next paycheck for the higher paying associateship, right? Oh, this person's offering me $10,000. You stay where you're happy and you can utilize what you're getting to create the life that you want.
Okay. Well, let me ask this question, and that's fair. That's a fair statement. But with dental schools being so expensive, how do you tell somebody to? I mean, yes, in all honesty, staying where you are happy does make sense, but sometimes it's also not fair. And I say that because of how expensive dental schools are. So if I had an additional $10,000, I could pay off my student loans faster. I could put a house deposit down for maybe a house, a small house, but a house, right? So how do we educate the future and say, stay where you're happy, but also kind of chase the money so that you can pay off student loans, pay off the credit card bills and so forth? Like, how do you balance that, with the message that you're giving out? Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Because what if a Maserati makes me happy? Should I go buy a Maserati? Like, you know what I mean?
I think you should make it your goal. For sure.
Yeah.
If a Maserati you feel like makes you happy, you're a car person, you like a car, set that goal and find a way to get it. But to answer your question in particular, I don't think necessarily we should chase the money. You see what I'm saying? I think you should be about your business though, for sure. Like you should not settle for what's less than what you think you personally deserve for the skill set you bring to the table, right? But at the same time, when I say that 10,000, I'm referring specifically. Let's say somebody gives you a $10,000 signing bonus to leave your job, right, and come work with me. Right. I'm looking at it as if you're working where you are and you're happy with what you do, you're technically going to produce better work. How about if you go to where you're not happy, you stay 3 months and you get fired and you were at a different associateship for 5 years and you really loved it there. Right. So that's the reason we want to bring the financial component behind it, because no dentist should be starving. Right. Like you should not go out for dinner and not have enough to be able to handle your check. So our goal is, how do we take whatever you're making and be able to set yourself up for success? And I know it seems so impossible, but it's a few decisions that are very important decisions, right? Simple things that when you get an opportunity, can you own where you live? When you get an opportunity, can you start cutting out certain revolving lines of credit, which is maybe it's a car payment that you don't need at that time, right? If you want the Maserati, can you get the Maserati in a way that it's not going to drastically change your DTI, and maybe you can pay it down or pay it off? You see what I'm saying? How do we do things the right way so we can handle things like student debt? Because student debt is real. I mean, there's no simple fix to this problem that's going on outside of the simple fact that my personal advice, if I'm telling a mentee, right, is stay public and stay home. If you can stay in state, that in itself is going to cut this student debt crisis in half. In North Carolina, we have the most cost-effective dental school, which is East Carolina University. And then UNC Chapel Hill, where I went, the average student is coming out with about $200,000 in debt. Comparing that to where things are now $300,000 and up. I mean, you're talking about that's $100,000 in savings. And if you're from the state of North Carolina, you can get a FAIL scholarship. That's not even FAIL scholarship, but it's a FAIL loan for service. That's another $75,000 on top of that right there. I mean, you're really coming out with maybe $150,000 if you play your cards right. Now you're not traveling home, paying $1,000 for a flight back home every Thanksgiving. Just small decisions like that. You see what I'm saying? It's not necessarily that this student debt crisis is becoming huge, because sometimes, just like you said, we're telling people to chase the school that you love versus go to the school that shows you the most love,
Right. That makes sense.
And that's it for this week's episode. If you want more, tune in next week as we continue the conversation. Go ahead and show my guys Real Tooth Be Told podcast some love. Follow them on Instagram at Real Tooth Be Told. Can't wait to see you next week.